Hello, everyone. This is Jim Stanford coming from Vancouver, Canada. Not yet Donald Trump's 51st state. Hey, it's a great privilege for me to join the AFTINET annual meeting. I wish I was there in person. So many great friends and comrades I've worked with over the years, and AFTINET's just been doing so much important work, more important now than ever, with all of the trade war and instability and war that is following in the footsteps of Donald Trump, unfortunately. So I'm here virtually to give a bit of a presentation on the view from the front lines here in North America about what Donald Trump is doing to the world trade regime, why it's going to be very dangerous and damaging, and how progressives in all parts of the world, including Australia, led by AFTINET, can fight back. So I'm going to share a few slides while I run through my presentation. Bear with me while I get these loaded up here, and we should be good to go. Trump's trade wars, debunking his lies, tallying the cost, building a response. Hard to believe that the official White House communications office, supporting the leader of the biggest, most powerful country in the world, would come up with nonsense like him dressed up as Superman, or the one the other day dressed up like a fighter pilot dropping poo on protesters. How on earth can you make this up? Stranger than fiction, but it just shows the depths to which democracy and political discourse in America have sunk. And then for those of us in other countries, Canada on the front lines, Australia a bit further away, but we're all still vulnerable to everything that he's doing to the economy, to the rules-based order, to the planet. Gosh, we're in a struggle here. What I will cover in my brief presentation, number one, I'll debunk some of Trump's lies about trade and what it means and what it doesn't mean. Number two, I'll give you some experience from Canada of how we've been trying to respond to Trump and protect ourselves and protect our sovereignty and our sustainability. And then finally, close out with some lessons for Australia. So in terms of Trump's lies, these are the things that he's been saying. He blames it all on the U.S. trade deficit, which he says destroys good jobs. And this has been his in with the disaffected workers in America who were so badly hurt by neoliberal free trade agreements. They ended up getting sucked into voting for him. But believe me, he's going to make things worse. He says the trade deficit explains why their prospects have diminished. He says the trade deficit results from unfair practices by other countries, an enormous victimization narrative that poor America is picked on by other countries around the world. He claims that the trade deficits from America are a subsidy to other countries, basically like they're paying other countries to run the trade deficit. He claims that it's an emergency, the trade deficit. The reason he uses the word emergency is this allows him to invoke these strange, obscure features of U.S. trade law to impose tariffs unilaterally. Pull out his black Sharpie pen at 9 in the morning and sign a tariff agreement, pull it out again at 2 in the afternoon and sign a completely different agreement. What kind of country gives that kind of power to one person? Obviously a flawed country, but his claims that it's an emergency and that it's all necessary for national security are necessary for him to invoke those special powers. Finally, he says that by putting tariffs on imports from other countries, that will level the playing field and bring those jobs home to America. So those are the lies. Let's talk about the truth. If you're looking for the truth, don't go to Trump's truth social media. Let's look at the actual facts. Number one, the trade deficit is not new. They've had a trade deficit for 49 straight years. And the safest bet you'll ever make is this year will make it 50 straight years. It's not large, and it's certainly not an emergency. The U.S. has a trade deficit, which means they buy more from the rest of the world than they sell to the rest of the world. Or in other words, they consume more than they produce. Results not from mistreatment by unfair trading partners. It results from an ongoing and massive flow of capital, financial capital, into the United States from other countries. Every year, trillions of dollars of money flow into America from rich people, investment funds, mutual funds, banks, shadow banks, central banks, governments all around the world, trying to get a piece of the action in the U.S. economy. and that includes stocks like the inflated AI bubble stocks that we're seeing today with NVIDIA and other bubble stocks. It includes bonds, it includes derivatives, it includes property and real estate, it includes crypto. Everything that is for sale in America, the rest of the world's investors want a piece of it. And that money flows into America and gives America, not Americans, but the American system, more money to spend on goods from abroad than they make selling goods to abroad. That explains the trade deficit. It's a sign of power, not a sign of victimization. The jobs that Trump claims he's trying to bring back to America were never American jobs in the first place. So, for example, here in Canada, we're fighting like heck to try to preserve or save our auto industry. Trump says he's forcing companies to bring the jobs back to the US. We've been manufacturing cars for as long as the Americans have. They aren't America's jobs, they're our jobs. So that makes no sense as well. Excuse me. In fact, the U.S. is losing manufacturing jobs, losing blue-collar work under Trump's policies. They have lost 100,000 manufacturing jobs in the last year. And surveys of executives show that they think Trump's tariffs are making their businesses worse in America, not better. It's purely about politics, how a corrupt billionaire could trick disaffected working people who've suffered so much into thinking he's their savior and he's their hero, and that he's one of them. That's what the whole debate about the trade deficit has been for Trump, and unfortunately, it got him narrowly elected. But we have to, as progressives in America, obviously, but everywhere else, show working people that he and his policies are not the solution. Here's one graph that shows the truth about the U.S. trade deficit as a share of GDP over the last quarter century. It's been there all along. It's a normal structural feature of the U.S. economy because of those ongoing capital inflows. It was much bigger in the 2000s, shortly after China joined the World Trade Organization and imports from China surged. It's much smaller, about half the size now as it was then. Certainly not an emergency. He certainly can't blame Australia for it. Oh my gosh. This shows the top 10 U.S. bilateral trade deficits. You see Canada there, number 10. We get a whole lot of his rhetoric, but his trade deficit with Canada is small relative to other countries. But Australia is one of the few industrial countries where America has a trade surplus, $34 billion US in 2024 in goods and services, meaning America is selling more in Australia than the other way around. So by that token, Australia should be the savior. But you still got hit with his tariffs, which shows you this has nothing to do with trade deficits whatsoever. The absolute peak lunacy in this whole debate was his Liberation Day tariffs that he announced with all those flip charts, where he had a bizarre calculation to create a specific tariff rate for each country based supposedly on how badly they were mistreating America. And the countries with the highest trade tariff rates under his calculation were impoverished countries like Bangladesh or Cambodia. Astounding. How did he get this? Well, the logic of his argument makes no sense, and economists of all stripes have ridiculed it. But the specific formula he used was absolutely crazy. The change in tariff for each country equals the difference between exports and imports from that country, the X and the M in the numerator, as a share of imports from that country, so to normalize it all, and then two mysterious-looking parameters, an epsilon and a phi, in the denominator of the formula. And then they plugged in convenient numbers for that. The epsilon was meant to be the extent to which tariff changes or import price changes would feed into final consumer prices in America. The other one was meant to be the elasticity of consumer demand for changes in import prices. So the first parameter was assigned the value 4, no evidence for it. The second parameter was assigned the value 0.25, no evidence for it. Well, guess what? I have a PhD in economics, and I can tell you in my head, 4 times 0.25 equals 1. And if you put 1 as a multiplicative factor in a fraction, it has no impact. It just disappears. So these parameters were absolute just window dressing. Then, on top of it all, they divided the whole thing by 2. And somebody asked Trump, why did you divide it by 2? And he said, because I'm a nice guy. So the whole thing is just absolute lunacy. Trump chose the formula. They imposed it on all kinds of countries, even non-countries. There are uninhabited islands off the coast of Antarctica that got a tariff. Uh, Even if you followed his formula, because Australia has a trade deficit with America, America has a surplus with Australia, you should apply Trump's tariff against them. Using his very formula, you would get a 28% tariff on all imports of goods and services from America. Too bad Albo didn't make that argument when he met Trump last month. Oh my gosh. Instead, he's talking nice and signing away control over critical minerals. Those are the lies from Trump. Here's how we've been trying to respond to him in Canada. An absolute frontal attack on our sovereignty. At the time of his inauguration, he mentioned an old ideology called manifest destiny from the 19th century, which is this idea that God gave America the right to take over all of North America. That's what manifest destiny means. And it justified their expansion. It justified their takeover of large parts of Mexico, for example, and their expansion up towards Canada. And this jargon, this destiny, this policy seems to be on Trump's mind. And he joked several times about making Canada the 51st state. And lo and behold, we figured out it was no joke, especially when he starts applying the same logic to other places in the world, like Panama, Greenland, Gaza, and so on. His ambassador, who's a big fundraiser and flunky for Trump, his ambassador to Canada said we shouldn't be upset. He can't imagine why Canadians are upset. He said it's a gesture of affection that Trump wants us to be the 51st state. One silver lining to Trump's election, and it's similar in Australia, as soon as he started talking about 51st state and taking over Canada, lo and behold, Canadians realized this is a big threat, and their approach to politics changed dramatically just in time for our election last May. So we had a situation where a band of right-wing conservatives, a very hard right populist party, kind of like Peter Dutton, was poised to win. But because of Trump's attacks, the polls shifted dramatically, and we ended up re-electing our centrist party. We call them liberals, different than your liberals, for another term in a minority situation. But gosh, that's better than the alternative. And that's all indirect thanks to Donald Trump. So this whole idea, this is Mike Myers, the famous Canadian-born comedian on Saturday Night Live, saying we got to get our elbows up. For those who don't know, that's a reference to ice hockey, Canada's national sport. So this is our greatest ever hockey player, Gordie Howe, one tough cookie, getting his elbows up in the corner. That's what we're talking about. We used to think Wayne Gretzky was our greatest ice hockey player, but then he showed up at Trump's inauguration, the asshole, and that's when we said, America, you can keep him. What Trump's been doing, he's imposed a 35% across-the-board tariff on imports from Canada, a lower rate for energy. Gee whiz, why does he want a lower tariff for energy? Because he wants our energy cheap. There's an exemption for products that come in under the rules of origin of the Canada-US-Mexico agreement, the existing North American Free Trade Agreement. We don't know how long that exemption will last. The whole agreement is up for review next year. And if Trump pulls out his Sharpie and says the agreement doesn't exist anymore, then we're really going to have problems. But in addition to that across-the-board tariff, his biggest attack right now are these sector-specific tariffs under what's called Section 232 of U.S. trade law, which are aimed at particular high value-added industries, automotive, primary metals, trucks, aerospace products, semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, industrial machinery, all the industries where Canada takes its natural resources, adds value, and transforms them into sophisticated value-added products. No exemption under the existing CUSMA trade deal for those. They're getting hit full bore, and it's a total attack on Canada's industrial economy. So initially, we were exempted from his Liberation Day nonsense, but it doesn't matter because we're still getting the full force of those attacks on our high value-added industries. Just recently, for example, the big automaker Stellantis announced it was going to stop production of a vehicle in Canada and shift it to a plant in Illinois as a way to appease Trump and help that company avoid Trump's tariffs. And we'll see much more of that unless we can find a way to push back with a concerted industrial strategy. Trump's always got a changing justification for why these tariffs are there. He blamed immigration, he blamed fentanyl, he blamed defense spending, he blames our agricultural marketing boards, he blames the fact that we've got limits on operation of foreign banks in Canada. He'll come after Australia on that one, rest assured. We had a little digital services tax, a kind of token 3% tax on Meta and Amazon and Google and all the other digital companies. He didn't force, Canada's government gave it up as a way to try to appease him. But every time we do one thing that Trump wants, or not we, the government does one thing that Trump wants, he goes to the next thing on his list. He cannot be appeased. And there are a few right-wing politicians and obviously a lot of corporate lobbyists in Canada who think we should carry on with appeasing Trump and we should do what Trump says and that he's right about all these things. Exactly as you have in Australia. You have to beware of these quisling component to your local politics, a group that loves Trump and wants to do what Trump is doing and uses the attacks on trade policy as an excuse to do it. Trump has basically shot the American economy in the foot because his tariffs have made inputs to American businesses, everything from energy to raw materials, forestry products, agricultural commodities, parts, machinery, the whole gamut, more expensive. So it's harder to manufacture products in America today than without the tariffs. That's why they've lost 100,000 jobs. They've lost more manufacturing jobs than Canada has, even though we're the target for his tariffs. So he's shot himself in the foot there. He's also shot himself in the other foot, both feet, because he's damaging the economies of his major trading partners. So Canada is the biggest foreign market for American products, and the economy's in trouble in Canada. We're just on the verge of a recession. So that's not going to help U.S. business either. Right now, we're in a situation where the Liberal government, the centrist government, is facing huge pressure from the corporate sector to appease Trump, cut taxes and regulations, double down on exports of fossil fuel, basically do all of the things that corporate Canada ever wanted anyway. But now, Trump is the excuse to do it. And unfortunately, the government is listening to a lot of those demands. At the same time, they're getting pressure from the other side to protect our existing industries, from unions and community groups and environmental groups to protect our environmental policies instead of throwing them out as the corporations want, to invest in the domestic economy, including infrastructure and renewable energy, and to support the non-traded economy. Naturally, we're concerned with exports and export industries. But remember, in Canada, and it's similar in Australia, close to 80% of total GDP in the economy never crosses a national border. It's produced in Canada by Canadians for Canadians. And instead of saying, well, we better cut back on spending because the deficit is a problem and Trump is attacking us, we should increase investment in the non-traded economy, including public services, as a way of strengthening our economy in the face of Trump. Our economy is staggering, but not yet in a full-out recession. If, in fact, he hits us with the full brunt of the tariffs on all industries, we will have a serious recession. But in any event, we have to learn the lesson that we cannot put our eggs in the U.S. basket. We have to diversify our trade and build our industries. This shows the problem we're having in Canada of losing our value-added industries, the same industries Trump is going after with those Section 232 tariffs, and instead reverting back to our historical role as a producer of raw materials and resources for the U.S. And Australia, of course, has the same problem. In fact, Australia has the same problem, but worse. In Canada's case, at the turn of the century, we had built a whole series of very successful industries, including the car industry, aerospace, machinery, pharmaceuticals. And so by that point, at the turn of the century, only 20% of our merchandise exports were raw materials, staples products extracted from nature. That has increased steadily since we entered free trade with the United States. They got special provisions to have access for our energy, and now our remaining value-added industries are under attack from Trump. So last year, 50% of our exports were raw materials, staples products. In Australia's case, it's worse. It's 70%. But we face the same challenge of trying to preserve our capacity as a country to be a full-fledged industrial power, to produce the whole range of goods and services, not just dig stuff out of the ground. Okay, let me conclude. Thank you for your attention, friends. Let's talk about what the lessons are for Australia. This graph shows that you are not on the front lines of Trump's tariff war in the same sense that Canada is. This shows different countries in the world and the share of their GDP that is represented by exports to the U.S. market. And in Canada's case, we're right up there with Mexico and Cambodia, as I mentioned, as countries the most vulnerable to Trump's tariffs, because in Canada's case, those exports to the U.S. represent over 25% of our GDP. In Australia's case, because you're far away, this is one time in history it helps to be far away, and because you have a more diversified portfolio of export markets, you're much less directly vulnerable. Just under 1% of Australian GDP goes to the U.S. in exports. So Trump could put a 100% tariff on, and it would hardly make any difference. You'd hardly be able to measure it in Australia's economy. Ironically, that highlights the failure of the Australia-U.S. free trade agreement to stimulate big exports of value-added products to America, which is what was promised at the time. Nothing happened on that score. You have the big trade deficit from your perspective with America, a surplus for America. But right now, the upside of that is you're not very vulnerable to his tariffs. So that's a good thing. Being a small country, you get this argument just like Canada does. The argument is made you have to bow down to the bigger player, and that's absolutely wrong. The U.S. requires, they need our imports, both from Canada and Australia. They need those resources, and they even need some of the value-added products. They need resources that they cannot produce at home, and we saw that big time with Trump's interest in critical minerals in his meeting with Albanese. Remember, the Americans have got access to a market in Australia that's not the biggest in the world, but it's a rich market, and it's a lucrative and profitable market. That gives Australia leverage to push back against U.S. Demands to say, if you want a piece of this action, if you want to sell stuff here, you have to, number one, be reciprocal and play fair. Number two, you should be producing something in Australia if you're going to be selling here. Same goes for all of the foreign direct investment in Australia and resource industries and other industries by U.S. firms. Here's another point of leverage for even a small country, and Australia and Canada are both important in this. Remember, I mentioned the U.S. trade deficit results from these huge ongoing capital inflows to the U.S. Some of that comes from Australia in the superannuation funds. Think about how much money, hundreds of billions of dollars they've invested in the U.S. economy. Same in Canada. Here's a shocking fact. We have a public defined benefit pension plan in Canada. You don't have one. You should have one, but we have one called the Canada Pension Plan. Half of its assets are invested in the United States. Like, WTF, why on earth would we invest half of our own pension fund in the U.S., the economy that's trying to take us over? We got to bring that money home. And you can do the same in Australia. Of course, either of our countries going one-on-one with Donald Trump is going to be a challenge. China can do that, and they did it. China's the only country that really forced Trump to back down. The rest of us could do it if we got our act together and approached him collectively, instead of each individual leader making a pilgrimage and kissing butt for Donald Trump, as both Albanese and our Mark Carney have done. Key lessons for Australia, friends, to wrap up. Being nice with Trump will not protect you. You can make concessions and he'll just go to the next item on his list. You have a trade deficit with America. They have a trade surplus with you. Did that protect you? No, you still got tariffed. You are not heavily reliant on access to the U.S. market, but you'll still have some disruption. More importantly will be the disruption globally from Trump's swinging a sledgehammer at the rules of the game internationally. The fact that you've got more diversified trade and export ties is helping, so keep doing that. Obviously, resist the warmongering with China and try to strengthen links with China instead of joining the UK and the US in some hostile alliance. And everything that AFTINET's been arguing for years and years and years, that the neoliberal free trade edifice does not work. It empowers corporations, but it impoverishes people, even in the developed North, let alone the global South. And it hurts workers on all sides. You can't say there's winners and losers among workers. Workers in America are suffering as much as workers in Canada today from Trump's trade war, and the same goes for all the other relationships. So this is the time to really move forward with the things AFTINET has been arguing for years. about managed trade, about reciprocal trade, about trade that respects human rights and labor rights and environmental standards rather than running roughshod over them. Of course, we've all got a big worried eye on what's happening inside the U.S. and the erosion of democracy by what Trump is doing. And all we can do from outside is fight like hell to defend our own democracy, our own principles, our own values. And that's where we need a united workers' movement from around the world, from Canada to Australia and everywhere else, to stand up against Trump and stand up against the people in our own countries who want to do just what Trump is doing. In that regard, I'm very, very grateful for the leadership and the insight and the incredible organizing power that AFTINET has demonstrated over the years. Thank you for what you do, and keep up the fight. Very good.